Let's have a little bit of talk about throttle shafts. The other day, Chris, I believe, on the Air Fuel Spark page had commented on a couple builds I did, and he said, hey, you used a secondary shaft for both carbs. And that's not actually true. Every 2.4 carb that I have ever seen from Ford came just like this. Has a little throttle pin about 3/8 inch down from the center between that and the axle or axis of the shaft here. Every one of them came this way. In 1963 and 64, this is how all of them were. All of the 550s, all the 600s. And later on in 65, 66, 67, 68, they were all the same way as well. What is common to see is a add-on pin being added in 66 and later on the top section. And there's a pretty good reason for that. I'll add the pin here and show exactly how it works. And it's just a serrated nut here and a throttle pin that just bolts on. And I'll just drop that. All right. But anyway, it's just takes a 3/8 wrench, and the serrated end there grabs in quite nicely. And I'm not going to bother tightening it all out. Shoot, maybe I will. All right, that'll work. And so these are your two linkage arms, and this one here goes in this hole, and we'll put a washer and a hitch pin, and then the arm here goes in there. So that way when you operate the throttle, it goes all the way to wide open throttle, no problem. And we add our secondary rod in. This is like a slider. The brass piece comes up top here, goes in the bottom. We'll just pin this in place too, just to show. Let's see if I can. That needs to be way shorter. So with the bottom pin, this is about where we're at here, where they're both at idle. And then both of them reach wide open throttle at the same time. Yeah, you ought to be able to see that pretty well. Okay, so what happens if we add this to the top? Well, we need to adjust it. So this is shorter. Excuse me, longer. If you notice, this pin here before was all the way at the end of the slider, and now we're getting it to where it's, and you can take up some adjustment here as well. This is almost too long at the time, but I'm trying to make a damn video. So and there we hit wide open throttle at the same time. So like 65, 66 and later, a lot of times you have a double pin, and I have seen that. I have never seen just a high pin from the factory. The stock shafts all came exactly like this. And I think part of the confusion here is that aftermarket suppliers have been selling this shaft as a primary. And, if you're going to be using progressive throttle, that makes a lot of sense. But it's nice to have the option of doing both. And now that I've had, thousands of these made, I may start adding these to every stock build I do. You can always just remove it if you don't want it. But I find on stock or mild engines especially, having this little progressive throttle is kind of nice actually. And just provides a little bit of just running two throttle plates for, low level driving. If you have a much larger engine or especially a racier engine with a large cam or something, it's kind of nice to do 1-to-1. It just seems like the fueling runs better, especially with low vacuum. But you can see how that all worked. And let me try to spin this around. this is a low riser linkage. Operates like this. There's no spring return. The spring return is actually in the throttle, the accelerator rod, and all that. And then I think I have a here's a medium riser in comparison. This end here is exactly the same, but this end has a spring return. So you have your throttle shaft and spring return, but otherwise it works the same way. While I got you here, let me show you some other stuff. Take the phone off here. All right, so your factory base plate looks something like this, right? And that works pretty well. A lot of times you find that the later carbs, generic carbs, are more like this. And there's two problems with this. Oh, these are also generic universal shafts. Now, a lot of people want to try to use these, and they do work, but I just want to show you a few issues you may run into. So this is lined up here. We notice that due to the bend right here, the entire shaft is offset. Not much, but maybe, 3/8 of an inch. So when you try to bolt up the linkage arms, like these here, they have to bow out. It doesn't work quite as well. The main thing when you're setting up this sort of linkage is making 100% certain, and you want to bend it on the brass end here, that you want everything perfectly in line to where it's very smooth operation. And there's no sideways pulling of anything. It's, straight forward and back. If you have this here pulling at a weird angle, it's going to be screwy. And, if you buy a set of linkage, even from me, I try to test fit all of them, but sometimes, because of this is tweaked or that's tweaked or the way everything's mounted, you're going to find that maybe you need to bend this a little bit, the brass piece. And I would not suggest doing it on the carb or on the linkage itself. Take the whole unit off, put it in a vise or put an adjustable on it, kind of twist it a little bit, and just try to get a little bend in it, and get all that worked out before you get it here, because the smoother all this works, the better everything's going to work and the longer your throttle shafts are going to last. So back to this here. Two issues. Let me move some stuff out of the way. The first one is, if you notice, the medium riser intake pad is a little different than, this is the low riser intake pad here, which is very nice and solid. Low riser. Now with the medium riser, for whatever reason, they made it way thinner. Now on the old school deals here, that's not really a problem. Everything fits okay, feels good. The problem we have here is you have this PCV tube or brake booster pad or whatever, and it's cut out quite a bit. So when you actually look, let's see if I can flip all this crap around. Footballs everywhere. Oh, we're gonna have to zoom in here. Underneath, if you notice, just a little bit of that is exposed. And so the only way to use this sort of base plate on a medium riser intake is to use like a solid spacer, something like this, and try to zoom out. Try to use that, even if it has to be really thin, whatever. But as long as that sits there and actually seals, because you have to be real careful you don't get some air that pulls in there. These have cutouts as well, and it would be shown underneath here, but it's not as big of a deal because the actual bores themselves are perfectly sealed, and then you could put the base plate on top and it would seal all that up. All right, so that's the first issue with running a generic base. Shoot, I gotta go get well, no, I don't. Yeah, let me get some linkage here. we'll grab a, see, again, that's the medium riser and the low riser. Not much of a difference, but just a little bit of offset. So this is like a reproduction that I have made, and it's identical to the originals. Now here's our problem. We go to put it on and it won't sit down there because you have that extra fat piece of base plate, and that's a problem. So what you have to do is you're gonna need a cutout in the actual linkage like that. So what happens is when we go to install it, this is somewhat difficult to do with one hand. See how it sits on there? And now it sits flat. It's not a big deal, but just trimming that little piece there accommodates that. I would not advise, I've seen it before where people take a file or a mill or a die grinder and just grind this whole section of the base plate off. Don't do that. These base plates are weak enough to begin with. Better to leave them as strong as possible. So now back to our other linkage dilemma. Let me kind of bolt this down a little bit. Okay, since we have this 3/8 of an inch offset, now we have a problem where these pieces here barely fit. I mean, we're gonna have to grind off this front tab here in order for it to work at all. And even so, it's gonna be somewhat difficult to get that on there, just because see how out of line it is? It's not so bad on that front section, but this back one here, or the primary carb, is pretty horrible. And it's just not ideal. So if you could use the original Ford shafts, it would be a way cleaner setup, and the original style base plates would just be easier all around, especially, you know, when you're thinking about a vacuum leak, which, trust me, that's one that you can barely, you may be able to hear it, but on a really loud, large cammed engine, it might be very hard to find, especially if the dang engine won't start because of a vacuum leak. Anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. That's the difference between the high pin and the low pin, and how you can have it doubled, like a lot of the GT500s had them just like that. And I hope that answers Chris's question about why I use 2 secondary shafts. I didn't. Those are just the stock shafts. All right, thanks.